for, how many meals was it? I forget.
Most people creating meals simultaneously.
Most people creating meals simultaneously, and it was around the world. So we were part of a world record of putting together meals. But a really amazing day, and this evening's spotlight highlights some of that. So with that, we'll let it roll.
Well, we started Give Day when we were in 5th grade. I wanted to be part of it because my family has taught me how to have a heart for the world.
First year, we actually sent hygiene products like soaps. And then second year, once we got to middle school, we started raising money to get food. And then we sent the food in 7th grade to Mozambique. And this year, we're going to be sending them to more places in Africa.
You know, we're so privileged here that it's good to get to share that with everybody else who, doesn't have such good luck. And, a lot of people are hungry in the world, so it's just an important thing to do.
Our school has a lot of PTA fundraisers, but we don't do anything for anybody else. So I thought it was important because we always help ourselves, and now we started helping other people too.
3 years ago, 725 million people across the globe were suffering from hunger. As of a year and a half ago, that number jumped up to 815 million. Unfortunately, due to the amount of conflict and natural disasters taking place each and every day across the world, that number has now gone up to 821 million people. So what are we doing to combat that? We have a few different initiatives, one of them being what we're doing here today. It's our meal packaging event. So all across the United States and at our international offices, we package these meals made up of soy, rice, vegetables, and a vitamin packet. And those actually go out to mostly school feeding programs all across the world. So for example, the program here has sent to Madagascar, Haiti, Mozambique, and many more. We're in 34 countries all over the world right now. And last year we were able to make 72.1 million meals. So Mary Ellen is a big contributor of that. They've made 30,000 meals per year, and they continue to come back, so we're really grateful for it.
So a couple of things you saw in there were the ambassadors. You saw some of our staff in there. This couldn't have happened without the support of some very incredible staff at Mary Ellen Henderson, and a couple of folks in particular that were directly involved, and I won't remember everybody, but Ross Mandel, I think, was part of it, and you guys can fill in. And Tara Philmeyer were the two that were really spearheading the work from Henderson and did an incredible job. So the food there goes around the world. It's a really incredible opportunity to serve people outside of our community that really need it the most. So wanted to welcome our friends to the table and turn it over to the board if you all had any questions or comments.
Let me start by asking if any of the representatives would like to make any, thank you, any comments. I've seen Give Day. It's an amazing program. So let me turn it over to you first.
Okay. Well, thank you for having us and celebrating with us. We were just really, really proud of the kids. And Give Day started about 4 years ago when Suzanne and I just started talking about what do we do about our community, where we are a community of affluence and opportunity, and how do we shape our kids to be caring. And we felt like it was very consistent with our school being an IB school, and we wanted to celebrate sort of the learner profile traits, and so that's how we ended up coming up with Give Day. Our boys were the first class of kids to help create Give Day when they were 5th graders. They are now 8th graders. You saw some of them on the video. We are very grateful for the support of the schools to be able to do this. We are blessed by the generosity of our community. We think that there is some opportunity to better embed ourselves with the IB curriculum, and we've been having some great conversations with Carrie Checka at the elementary school, because we're doing a local project there, and then at the middle school we did a global project, and Alicia Miller has been really helpful in helping us to think through this, and of course the PTA is involved in it. And then we had a day of reflection this past Monday, and we're really grateful. We had an administrator from George Mason come down and listen to our 8th graders who are very passionate about this and thinking about, could this build up into George Mason? And so there were some ideas that were thrown around, and we'll see where that goes.
Open the floor for board members. Ms. Litton.
I just want to say thank you so much, you guys. This is like my favorite thing that we do, so it's so great. One question I have for you guys is, you guys have been so integral to making this happen. How do we keep it going? You know, I think we'd love this to be something that's really part of what we continue to do through the years, and how do we keep it going? What do you think?
Okay. Well, we recruit more amazing parent volunteers like Mary, who has helped take this idea from when Suzanne and I started at 12 ambassadors to this year we had 97. And so Whitney Cass Stevens and Mary Asel put systems in place that we could accommodate that many kids. And the power of Give Day, especially at the middle school, is that the kids are working shoulder to shoulder, and it's the entire school that's serving together. And so there is a power in that. We are very interested in sustainability. It's not something that I think that the parents can continue to sustain. And I think there's also lost opportunity if we don't get more school engagement. There's a lot of inquiry-based learning that we're just not trained in. And so we would love to collaborate further with the PYP coordinator, the MYP coordinator, and others in the school system that want to help make this happen. An idea that we've floated around is at the middle school, and there has been no accepted, it's just an idea at this point, but I know in 8th grade the kids are going to have to do a community project that's tied to the MYP curriculum. And so one of the ideas that we've had is maybe in 6th and 7th grade, could there be a flex class that is dedicated to some of the inquiry-based learning that could happen around Give Day, and then the parents complement what they're doing by helping with some of the fundraising to be able to pull off this project. So that's something we're thinking about.
Other board members?
So you touched on this briefly, but is there a lot of work to try to get this to be at the high school as well? So I just think it seems like a really great program, and I didn't move here until 10th grade, so I had no idea that it was happening. And I feel like there are a lot of clubs at the high school that would love to involve.
Yeah, well, my oldest is an 8th grader, Jonathan, who is on the video, and so I don't know much about the high school, but I do know that there's a class of 9th graders that have participated in this, and then it's been mostly the 8th graders who've been kind of taking it up as they go. I think the beauty at Mason, from what I understand, is that there are so many opportunities for the kids to indulge in their own passions and interests, and so we do not want to take away from that, but we would love to complement what is happening at the school by offering something that everyone can participate in together. And this group of rising 8th graders, I think there are probably 30 or 40 kids that are now involved, and they want to bring it to Mason. And David Serensitz, did I say that right? Serensitz, he came and met with the 8th graders on Monday and heard their thoughts and expressed support and desiring to help the kids make it happen. And we recognize that as the kids get older, the parents are less involved and the students take much more ownership. And that has been the case from the 5th grade onward. They just absorb more and more of the leadership. So I hope they'll be able to pull something like that off. There certainly is a passion for it. We'll see if they can make it happen.
It seems like a really great program. And just off the top of my head, I think we have a pretty active Food for Others club at the high school.
Yeah.
And I think they might.
That's great.
Yeah, and Food for Others is a partner for the elementary PTA, and we're going to do about 1,500 meals on MLK Day to go towards Food for Others. So I love that Mason is doing that as well.
Well, thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Castillo.
Yeah, well, thank you for giving this idea such momentum and building the enthusiasm. Is there anything that we can do to help? Is there, in terms of putting all this together?
That is a good question. I think from what Christine said about working more in collaborating with the curriculum, with MYP coordinator at MEH, I think that will really help us kind of bridge that gap between doing so much heavy lifting on the PTA side and then leveraging all the experience that they have to get those learner profile traits, all that kind of information that those kids know. They know it when she comes in and gives those lessons, and they know how to, and we're okay, and that just has to take off. So I think that's the support that the kids need and the program needs to keep going.
And we also always love money.
That helps. Yes.
For that, you'll need to speak to the city council.
Yeah, we'll go there next.
Thank you very much. It's an absolutely
Thank
wonderful
you for your
program,
support.
and I can't tell you how much we all appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that takes us through item 2 into item 3, public comments and requests. We do not have any forms turned in yet. Is there anyone who wishes to make a public comment? Seeing none, we will go forward to our first closed meeting of the evening. About how long should this be, Dr. Noonan? 5 to 10 minutes, so it'll be a short one. Would someone like to read us into closed?
Whereas the Falls Church City Public School Board has convened a closed. No, I already skipped
Pursuant.
ahead. Sorry. Excited. There we go. Pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter. Personnel under section 2.2-3711A1, in particular staff appointments, staff reassignments, staff resignation, staff retirement, staff performance, staff change in position, child care leave, long-term medical leave, and leave of absence, student matters under section 2.2-377A2, in particular tuition waiver under policy 9.21, interrupted resident.
For a second? Thank you, Ms. Gill. Would the clerk call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Castillo? Ms. Gill? Aye. Mr. Reitinger?
Yes.
Ms. Russell? Aye. Thank you.
As we said before, about 5 or 10 minutes. It shouldn't be very long. Thank you. Thank you all for waiting. Would someone motion to reconvene to an open meeting? All in favor? Oh, yes. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Could someone certify the closed meeting, please? Thank you, Ms. Litt.
Whereas the Falls Church City Public School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provision of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3711B of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law, now therefore be it resolved that the City of Falls Church Public School Board hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirement by Virginia's law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification applies, and only such public business matters that were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo. Clerk, call the roll, please.
Yes.
Aye.
Yes. Thank you very much. There are no recognitions to report. That takes us to the consent agenda. I might ask unanimous consent for the items on the consent agenda to be passed. Seeing no objections, so ordered. That takes us to item 8, business, action, and information. The first item is approve of the 2019 legislative package. Dr. Noonan?
Thank you, Mr. Reininger. This evening, I'd like to actually turn it over to Ms. Litton when she's ready, but first, before she takes over, I just want to say thank you to her for her incredible work pulling this legislative package together. When it was first presented, I would submit that perhaps it was a little light on content, and after some good conversations and discussions with some other colleagues around the state, as well as some of our local legislators, there have been some additions to the legislative positions that I think are in the interest of the city. So thank you for your work on this legislative package, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. I think all of you, I sent this out a little over a week ago, so hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at it. I don't think there were any further concerns. You know, I would just highlight a couple things. I think a priority of returning control over the school calendar. I think that's one of our priorities. There's a residency issue. And we also added some language about teacher pay and asking for a plan around that. So I think those were all good additions. And if nobody has any questions or concerns, we can go ahead and, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Litton. Any questions or comments from the board? Mr. Castillo?
Just one little itty bitty thing. Sorry, I missed it. In our first paragraph on the fourth line, it talks about, third line, the needs of students and interests of families, and is the state additional mandates. I know there's some people in Virginia who are very hung up on being Commonwealth and not a state. Should we say the Commonwealth instead? I don't really know, but.
Anybody?
I believe it is a Commonwealth, but I would defer to our esteemed counselor.
I would change it.
Get wrapped around the axle about that, so.
I think we're probably happy to change that. Can we go ahead and change it? Just, okay, pass it, noting that change.
There being no further comments, would someone like to make an appropriate motion for approval of the legislative package as amended by discussion?
I move that the school board approve the 2019 FCC passed legislative package as amended through discussion.
Second. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Ms. Litton, and to everyone else who worked on the package. The next item is 802, the always controversial discussion and adoption of the school calendar for the next year. Dr. Noonan?
With that as a lead up, boy, I'm really looking forward to talking about this one. Actually, we are hoping that this isn't very controversial at all, actually. Probably less controversial than last year, because this year there's more, believe it or not, it's less controversial when there's more than one option. So this year, two options were presented. The faculty and staff across the division had a chance to take a look at it and review both options, and Lisa High is going to go through the results of those responses and then make a recommendation.
Before Labor Day, would you be in favor of moving the school before Labor Day? And there was 64 yes, 35.4% who said that they would not. One of the questions that did come up through this is, if we start before Labor Day, what does that mean for the end of the school year? And then we said, at this point, it doesn't affect our 1920 schedule. This is just planning ahead. So if you look at just for our calendar, 2020, the calendar the staff.
So just some further context about draft one and some of the working agreements, if you will, that we sort of had going into it was, one, we needed to have 180 days of instruction, and that's really important. And what we also know is that we are bound to not being able to start until after Labor Day, and that it is the community's will and wish, based on some information we've received from the school board, to end as closely to June 15th as possible. So as a consequence of that, we get sort of squeezed in terms of where the days can go, if you will. So the great distinguishing differences between draft one and draft two is draft two actually would end the school year on June 12th, and this one actually ends the school year on June 17th. It does push the end of the school year into that following week, 2 days after the 15th, which I know is sort of a marker that the school board has indicated that they would like to end by. And I would submit to you that it's really close. We're within 2 days. And what's nice about having those 3 days at the end of the school year is that there has been some question, and it's the perennial question, what actually happens on the last few days of school anyway, and why should my kids come? And in our conversations that we had when we went through this at the work session at the last meeting, I thought it was really an important conversation to have, because those 3 days can actually become more relevant. We do a lot of end of year activities. We do a lot of end of year picnics, a lot of awards ceremonies and the like. And rather than engaging in those during that last week of instruction leading up to the 12th, we could actually do those on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of that following week. So we're excited to present to you draft one as the superintendent's recommended option, as well as the staff recommended option, and believe that having that 2-week window at the winter holiday was an important component from the community that I've heard, knowing this year that we don't. And I'm hearing from some folks about that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noonan. As the chair gets set up, I'll continue for a few more moments. Let me open the floor to questions and comments from the board about the calendars.
Lisa, this isn't a question about the calendars, a survey. And so in the before Labor Day question asked, were you able to break out the response even further in terms of the populations for foreign? Was there a certain school or schools that were more inclined to want one over the other? Okay. I would just be curious, yeah, just like if it's something that's, just randomly personal preference, or if there seems to be some sort of with regard to school.
For elementary versus secondary, that probably.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, but.
Can I comment on that as well? Just to say that this is about as unscientific a question that we could ever ask. It was not vetted or at all. It really was just to get a pulse more than anything. So if we were to ever have the opportunity to move to before Labor Day, we would certainly get much more involved and engaged with the staff by school and parents by community as well and by grade level. It just really was meant to sort of take the pulse, if you will.
Any more questions or comments from the board? The superintendent's recommendation is for option one, which is the 2-week winter break, which spills over 3 days after the 15th, 17th, 2 days after 17th, because the 15th is a Monday. Ms. Russell?
One more question. If I'm reading this correctly, does that mean that with the professional development day on April 3rd, that spring break would actually be weekend day? So spring break is 6 through the 11th, and then on the 13th is a professional day, so that would be no school on that day. So basically,
Any strong, Mr. Castillo?
I just say that as we build our calendar and figure out what we do with respect to Labor Day, that we also keep in mind whatever calendar helps our students learn in the best way possible would be the one that I would generally favor. So
Just as a point of perhaps just commentary, I suppose, I did ask my colleagues in the very large school division just to the west of us if they had seen any shifts in terms of student performance or attitudes or teacher preference following their move from the before Labor Day to the after Labor, from after Labor Day to before Labor Day. I did receive some preliminary data from their school division indicating that while there was not a lot of significant change in student outcomes, there was a lot of anecdotal information with respect to teachers and students feeling like they had more opportunity to prepare for whether it's state assessments, the IB assessments, or the AP assessments. So just something for all of us to consider as we think about this. You know, that IB window is prescriptive by IBO, and any more time that we can have prior to that is always helpful if we want to continue to become the premier international baccalaureate school division.
Ms. Michael?
I kind of want to echo that. Last year was the first. A lot of my IB exams, and for all of really, that having been just in good.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from the board? Straw poll, folks happy with option one for the 2-week break, which is the superintendent's recommendation? Would someone like to make a motion?
I move that the school board approve the proposed draft 1 as the 2019-2020 school calendar.
Second? Button? Favor? Still, but.
Thank you, Stephanie Ann. Next up. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome. Good evening. This evening, Sevi Pradilla, our Director of Facilities, has prepared a presentation in conjunction with Kristen Michael around the capital improvement plan or program for the City of Falls Church Schools. Before he begins his presentation, obviously we have some really great news stories happening around our CIP. First, you know, the completion or near completion of Mount Daniel addition, and also the passage of the bond as we work towards the development of the new high school. So I want to thank the board and Sevi and his team for really helping us get to the finish line on some of those projects that have already come forward. So with that, Ms. Michael, unless you have anything, turn it right over to Sevi, if that's okay with you. That is. All right.
All right, so I'm just gonna jump right in. Let me get to the page. I'm gonna start Jesse Thackeray and just go through the schools. All right, and then we can. So the first building. So the first building we're looking at is Jesse Thackeray Preschool. As you'll remember, we inherited this building from the city's SEALS program, and we did a complete renovation, 1,500 square foot addition onto this building in 20. So while it is relatively new, we have been experiencing some issues that we address both possibly in the current school year as well as moving into. The first one is to install a building-wide dehumidification system, and the second is to waterproof security vestibule main lobby. So this past summer, whole region extreme rain and humidity really overwhelmed the HVAC system at Jesse Thackeray. It was very humid in the building, with moisture on the floor and mold and lots of things. So our system just did not cope. So we reached out to a couple of different contractors who trained to come in and try to help build a system that'll help pull out moisture in that building, have the issues moving. And the second is the addition that we put onto that building is actually front, with security vestibule, sort of built into a hill, getting some water creating in side of the building right there. Waterproof side of that building, possibly out of some pump area. Both of those costs. The cost for the dehumidification system, our estimate right now is about $75,000 to $100,000. Our hope is to get this installed before either the summers, this fiscal year, or possibly moving in fiscal 2022. As well as same thing with waterproofing of security vestibule. We would like to get that this fiscal year, summer.
Just ask a question. Is there any grounds that we could raise for the water leaking in the security vestibule with respect to design or construction?
So that is something we have Kristen and I have spoken about internally. I have an answer.
This was obviously a very damp year. I mean, do we think these problems will persist? It wasn't just due to it being an especially bad.
Well, I think it definitely was an especially bad year, but how do we have had humidity, a little bit of humidity. We the next building, which is Mount Daniel, and I already know the news there. There are no requests for this building. we are finished with this building for now, minus the parking lot opening in January, which we're pretty excited about. All the trailers are out. Moving in Thomas Jefferson. So as you'll remember, TJ opened or had a major addition renovation to this building in 2012. That included 2 years later, we actually did HVAC system to the old building. Neither the renovation or addition or the but the mechanical electric system, we did. We didn't address the main engine, ADA accessible, but these are things we didn't touch, so address. So right now, our proposal is we would add about 10 to 12,000 square feet. Most of that would be to entry lobbies, right sizing the main office, making that main entrance ADA accessible. Quite that higher in our. But what you'll see in here is not current 6-year CIP. We've included this sort of an outlier year. give the council and the school board, planning commission, everybody. Our estimate is $3 to $3.5 million for the project. TJ?
Ms. Michael and Mr. Padilla, just a quick question if I might. So the 10,000 square feet is no additional classroom space, it's just renovation and some additional administrative space?
It could be, and it also could be an extra classroom or a specialty classroom or something. Right now, this is just sort of an estimate as to what we think. Many of the restrooms, it's not kind of right size, so it could involve adding a new restroom facility or something to those sides. Could be a number.
Just one more quick question. When enrollment was doing more of this, we were talking about a rapid need as early as 2021 of putting a second tower on TJ. I understand that's off, but this is well short of what that proposed renovation was. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I guess to kind of riff on Mr. Reidinger's question, spending 3 million-ish when the addition was, if I recall correctly, about 3 or 4 million. So we're spending a similar amount of money and not getting any new classroom space. Does that, should we think about doing something that would add some more classroom space and kill two birds with one stone? It seems potentially pretty expensive to do what's scoped here and not add anything in the way of classroom space.
I mean, I think we totally could. It depends on just where we are and where the board wants us to go. These are just the necessary needs. I think long term we're going to have. Electrical system is almost overwhelmed over there with computer parts, breakers. So we need to do those things, and those things all by the cost.
This is one of the spaces that we're going to have to watch very closely in terms of enrollment trends, just because of the questions that you've asked. If we touch it once, it might make sense just to go ahead and add some classroom square footage at the same time. So what you see in here is no need for additional square footage, but we could always go back. This is about $200 a square foot at a 10,000 square foot addition, which is pretty low for a renovation square footage dollar amount. So if we did go to say an 8 classroom addition and added 30,000 square feet, that number would climb. But again, if we touch it once, it might make sense to really think about how we utilize that building long term.
So I guess just to kind of boil it down, going with this and the CIP, if there was a situation where Mount Daniel needed to transfer the second grade back to teach, then in essence, those kids would probably have to go back to trailers, assuming that.
In that scenario, yes. I don't anticipate that happening based on the enrollment trends, but if it were to happen, yes, the second
But
grade.
since this doesn't create any additional space, then
Correct.
there's, depending on how enrollment trends are, and if they're exploding at Mount Daniel, then they're probably going to be seeing
Right.
increases at
That's right.
we need more.
it was, and those estimates were based from Arcadis, gave us those numbers based on a square map. Thought, that's kind of how we scaled.
Sorry, going back on something, I just, I know where this is outside the current CIP, so you're not asking us to approve this tonight because it's farther than 5 years out. I just, to back on one of the things that Dr. Noonan was saying, I think we really want to watch the numbers pretty carefully and continue to refine what the ideas are around this, because things can change relatively quickly. And I think 2 years ago, when we had a 6% jump in enrollment, what we don't want to do is planning on, in the case of an emergency. So I think we ought to start to develop and have in mind some contingencies for what happens if there's a SOAR, how quickly could we build a tower. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense to push out any of these sorts of major capital ideas until after MEH comes off the debt load for the city. But I just want to make sure that we've got plans or options at least to consider on the shelf that we can pull out at the time comes.
I just want to add one piece of context also, and I was going to save this for superintendent's matters, but since we're talking about Thomas Jefferson, it sort of maybe makes sense to mention now, and that is that last night the city council authorized the city attorney to engage in a contract to purchase the Fellows property across the street. So I don't know where that is, but they have been authorized at this point, and once that property is purchased by the city, it will be tagged, as I understand it, as a park and school property as well. So again, opening up more opportunities, and as we continue to pay attention and be vigilant in our activities around monitoring student growth, if there were some solution that would include that potential property, that would be something to consider as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would suggest that we revise this to say that we're doing what we've been talking about doing, and that we might come back and revise this. I'm not super comfortable with it being in here now the way it is and being outside the CIP anyway. I think it's just going to be an anchor that might create expectations that may not be borne out. I'm not sure why. So, if we're going to put this out there as a marker, let's discuss it a little more further, would be my suggestion.
I know in the past, I agree with you. I know in the past, the council has asked, what is your even longer than 5-year plan for these buildings? As you know, enrollment will probably continue to go up. So I think having this in there, I think is a good thing. And then also including that, what we're thinking about, we may need to do at some point if enrollment continues to rise, we would need to add on a tower. Just because if we don't include it at all, they start to say, like, are you even thinking about this? Have you considered the fact that you will probably need to add on a TJ? And we have, so just putting in there, even if it's not a concrete plan, it's just more of a forward-looking, not 5 years, but 10 years, maybe, hopefully longer.
So one of the things that in my past experience is one of the kindest gestures I think a school system can do for the city is say, we'll take that item and we'll push it out another year. So even if it is in and we continue to push it year over year over year, at least it's there. So if I'm hearing sort of most of you, or many of you, we can add back in that what we had last year was an 8 classroom addition with a main office and ADA accessibility, and it was in the neighborhood of about $15 million. We have the drawings, we have the plan, we have plans that we could pick up tomorrow and run with. And we can happily put that back in, and then just as we talk about it, as it comes up, just say this is there in case, and use it that way.
I think as the heads are nodding, I think
I
that's
see a lot of head nods. Yep.
the best way to,
Okay.
I believe that's the best way to move forward.
Okay.
All right,
We'll
thank
make
you.
that modification.
All right, thank you.
All right, so I'm gonna move into Mary Ellen Henderson. So Mary Ellen opened in 2006. Obviously, there are no major structural deficiencies. Correct. There are a few things that are more building usage. The flooring is starting to show here, especially the lower level crack. So what our plan was is to include place flooring fiscal year 25 with school. Would fully renovate serving area, older flooring that quite. Other thing we have on there is this is actually higher fiscal year 7. The new roof is placed. Funding. The last thing we also I put in there for fiscal year 2021 coincide with also the open high school, sort of rethink when it was built was sort of secure, thought of it as a secure vestibule. We used stairwell student change or the idea is push out a little bit, main in close the class or give us a security vestibule. Also, Mary Ellen is pretty secure. High end. So all 3 of those needs are roughly in the $300,000 range each. So what do a
The gym floor. So I was, so I was just at the boosters meeting, and they wanted to know what is going on with the gym floor, and how, are we addressing the underlying structural issues that may be causing?
We've decided to go with polished concrete.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
That's what I would ask.
No, it's a great question. So we are taking care of the underlying issue. We are fairly confident we know what the genesis of the water coming in was and what happened. We are fixing that and actually adding and reinforcing some of the water mitigation around the foundation, specifically with some sump pumps and the like. We're getting estimates now. This week or next, we're going to be looking at a couple of gym floors. We're not confident that we're going to put a wood floor back in. We may put a rubber floor in. That's what's going into a lot of middle schools across Northern Virginia right now. So we're going to go look at a couple of those, at least one, in the next week or so, to try to get that gym back up and going.
Is there any recourse to the people? I mean, do we have any recourse for, like, through insurance or otherwise for?
We have provided it to our insurance VML. They have sent an adjuster out, and we're still working through those issues with them.
Mr. Castillo?
But just so it's clear, given that people are asking, so
Sure.
how many more times is this going to happen? This was a different failure mode, right? There's
absolutely.
water from above the first time, and this time there was water from below, right?
Yeah. Kristen, do you want to? You're right. The first time it was a broken pipe from above, and this time it was. Go ahead.
Yes, you're absolutely
So if we were to replace the floor with the rubber talked about, which I understand middle school, but would that rule out be used for basketball?
I don't believe so.
Okay, I just wasn't sure what
Yeah.
HSL rules were.
Fairfax High School, for example, has had a rubberized floor for over. Yeah. No. It's a good question. But just as an example, Fairfax High School has had a rubberized floor. They're completely VHSL compliant, and they host regional events. They have since, in the last 2 years, gone to a wood floor, but it costs them about $800,000 to do the floor. So, but rubber floors are absolutely compliant with VHSL, and we can host events.
Mr. Castillo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So why aren't we putting in a rubber floor in the new high school? In other words, what are the respective pros and cons of rubber versus wood floor? And if you want to tell us later, happy to.
I'll just share my personal preference. They don't want to hear it. I'd much prefer a wood floor, and we had a great wood floor for 10 years at Henderson, and it was just fine, and until we had that failure overhead, and this time we had a failure below. So I think part of it is maintenance, part of it is the types of use middle school floors get versus high school floors. High school floors are hosting basketball, volleyball, other indoor track kinds of activities that are VHSL associated. The middle school isn't, so the floors aren't as much a part of the overall equipment for the exact sport that is going on, if that makes any sense. So I think a multi-purpose floor at a middle school makes more sense potentially in the long run than a wood floor at the high school. But we'll continue to have our internal debate. And before we do anything, we'll certainly bring it to you and let you know.
Well, and it kind of seems that this was sort of neither fish nor fowl, right? I mean, it was in the middle school, but it was used for high school events. And I could see down the road, it might be good to have another large wood floor gym available from time to time. So I'm not sure I disagree with your preference either, but I look forward to hearing how you sort this.
It's keeping me up at night.
Any other questions? All right, Mr. Padilla?
Certainly not least, our new high school. But we do break ground in June. Be exciting.
We're hoping December of 2020 to move in, and then the completion. Yep. That's right.
So that's it. So obviously the cost on that is $120 million. Next slide is I kind of went spreadsheet to show you the years. This current fiscal year that we are in, so you can kind of see the factory obviously. Where these finally the new building in 2 weeks ago. All on the web.
Thank you very much. Are there any additional questions, Mr. Castillo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So channeling the discussion about TJ, a couple of years ago, we were talking about the need to expand MEH. So where are we now? Is that something that may have to happen down the road? Because I know it was at least kind of being thought about when the ULI study was being done. So how is that, are we out of the woods on that, or if not, what's the plan?
I can speak to that a little bit. When we look at capacities, there's really two types of capacity, right? There's program capacity and there's overall capacity. And when we look at the program capacity, I think we've listed it at 768, I think is the number of program capacity. That means that classrooms, I forget exactly the number, 48 or 49 classrooms with roughly 22 students times 5 periods a day comes to that number, somewhere in that neighborhood of 700 plus. That would be our program capacity at about 80% utilization. When we look at better utilization than an 80% rate, meaning that a classroom might be used for 6 periods a day as opposed to 5, or 7 periods a day as opposed to 5, that amps the number up for us in terms of program capacity of that building. So that's a long way of saying, I think there's a lot more capacity in that building than perhaps we think there is, or maybe has been indicated previously with a full utilization of the building. Now, that being said, if there were ever a need to expand Henderson, and we did get to a point where it was absolutely untenable with size, we did ask that as part of the planning process for the new high school that they consider options for expansion. And there are some spaces that may be available for expansion on that site towards the parking lot, so if you think about the front of the building kind of moving out towards Route 7, would be some potential area for expansion. There is not a whole lot of opportunity across towards the high school, and there could be some possibility on the backside. But I think getting to that point where we are at, let's just use the number of, say, 850 or 900, we're pretty far away from getting to that point. So that's a less than scientific number, but I do think that there's a lot more capacity there than we think there may be.
Well, I don't remember what the estimates for that were. I think it was 20-ish, 30-ish to expand MEH. So you might want to work in somewhere saying, hey, I think I found a way to save $30 million. Because I think that would be well received.
Okay. So we lead with that?
Ms. Russell?
So forgive me, because this is my first round to see or question. But looking at this, it looks like that in my opinion, the security vestibule reconfiguration is something that needs to be done sooner rather than later, I guess. And I'm not saying we need to do it imminently, but I'm just wondering, is it possible that we could move it? And then it just seems something, I guess it does concern me that I stay awake at night, but it would be something that they could sooner.
I think we have it in the 2020. Can you scroll back? 2021.
So, yeah, the idea.
Oh,
is
to do it concurrently with the new.
Yeah, with that, and potentially it could even be something that Gilbane, as they're building and designing the other one, help us with that.
Not to say we couldn't move it up,
Could be.
if that's the will of the board.
I guess I would just be curious to what, if we've consulted with Tom, and if from a law enforcement standpoint, if there's been any recommendation with regard to that the current configuration and changes.
Yeah, I think anytime you can have a secured vestibule, the better opportunity you have. I think the space there is, it's just not quite big enough to house that security person with the current setup. I think there are some interim steps and interim measures that perhaps we could take. For example, and we'd have to check with the fire marshal to see if this is allowable, but there's a door handle that goes up into that staircase from the vestibule. So if it could be an exit only for egress as opposed to an entrance, that may be something that we could look at, and we could even consider configuring it similarly, temporarily anyway, similarly to how we've configured Thackeray or Mount Daniel, because there is certainly enough space to potentially put a desk in there, sort of up against that door even. So there may be some things, it's just there are some fire marshal issues in terms of access and egress that we would have to work through, but we may be able to work with them to find a temporary solution until such time as we get to the out year.
Any other questions? Mr. Castillo?
Well, I just say with respect to that, I would defer to your judgment about where it fits in the sequencing and in the priorities and how to get it accomplished in the best way possible. Obviously, secure schools are one of the pillars of our planning. And so, you know, if you want to go back and look at that, I'm happy to go with whatever you recommend.
Any other questions? If not, we'll entertain a motion. And I guess, and we're going to, or is it, we're at that point? I'm looking at this now.
So one of the things we could do is you could adopt it as discussed, and then we'll send you an amended version with the Thomas Jefferson piece
And I
amended.
was also going to ask about that particular part.
Would that work? Ms. Minson, does that work? Okay.
We'll do it that way. I can entertain a motion, please, from someone.
I move that the school board approve the adoption of the FY 2020 and FY 2025 CIP as discussed.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Layton. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Patea. All right. Next up is the fun conversation of every year. School board FY20 budget guidance. I will turn that over to your Mr. Anderson first.
It's actually just for the good of the discussion and the community watching, we've had a little bit of feedback that some are hard to hear if people are not using their mics directly. So it might be good to make sure we do that for this particular topic.
Dr. Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a reminder to the board, tonight, our hope was to share with you the guidance that we received last night from the City Council, share with you sort of our general thinking in terms of where we were going to head with the budget. And it's not any different in terms of the drivers than that we shared with you and the City Council a couple of weeks ago at the joint session. And then next week at our work session, really sort of dive in. But last night, Mr. Anderson and I attended the City Council meeting, and the City Manager and the CFO presented a guidance document that was shared with you on Friday in your Friday update that indicated that the guidance for the general government and schools was going to be 2%. There was some modification to that from the time that you received it on Friday to when it actually was adopted last night to indicate that it was 2% or organic growth. So in other words, if there's more than 2% growth, perhaps we could potentially get more than the 2%. But also if there was less than 2%, that would be an issue as well. The city manager and the CFO went ahead and shared some of the drivers that they have to think about as part of their planning processes, starting with a rather healthy amount to the WMATA, Washington Metro Area Transit Authority, and their obligation to WMATA, increased healthcare costs, compensation for employees, and some other contractual obligations that they have that are creating some pressure on their budget. And then, as I indicated along with Ms. Michael at our joint meeting a couple of weeks ago, our budget drivers are also healthcare. Looking at about a 10% increase in healthcare is going to cost us about $300,000. Looking at potentially some additional funding to become more competitive in the substitute pay area. So we were looking at adding about $50,000 so that we may be able to bring more parity in the sub-pay, particularly for those that are longer term and even qualified teachers. Additional areas of driver for us are a cost of living adjustment. And for us, because we have 500 employees and 86% of our budget is employee driven and salary sensitive as well, a 1% COLA for us represents about $400,000. And then the last, and sort of what we're hoping to really have a conversation about too, is the idea of doing a step increase for our employees this year. And that is for the good of the folks that may be listening at home. It's just sort of the contract that school divisions make with teachers and employees when they make the decision to join a public institution of school. Every school division in the United States that I'm aware of, that I've worked with, has a step in grade plan for compensation. So when you come in, you start at step 1, and at the end of your 30 years, you may end up at step 30 if there's 30 steps, or if there are consolidated steps, depending on where you go. But the contract is that the longer you stay, the more your salary grows and goes up, and you step. And as you gain, because we are a learning organization, as you gain, for example, education, so if you go back to school and you get a master's degree in education, you may move off of one salary scale, that's the bachelor salary scale, to a master's salary scale. And then you move over to, say you're on step 10 on the bachelor's, you move to step 10 but on a master's, and then there's an increase. And then the next year you go to step 11 and then to step 12. Over the past several years, the City of Falls Church, I think it's been in the last decade, we haven't been able to give a step 3 times. And we would like to, and last year being one of those 3 times, we did not give a step to our employees. So we would like to really consider, as part of our structure in the budget this year, looking at providing a step increase for our employees, and then taking care of some of those other things that I've indicated as well. So when we think about what is the universe of money with respect to 2%, a 2% increase for us represents about $850,000. That would be a transfer from the city council to the schools. And when you add up all of the items that I indicated, starting with a step increase and then adding to it a COLA plus this healthcare costs plus the substitute pay, it exceeds the $850,000. Which means that we have to have a conversation about that, about where do we want to go, and how do we want to maneuver through this budget as a team with respect to those things that we either want to take a hard look at to see if we want to keep, some things we might want to reduce. Are there areas where we can create some efficiency to find some dollars that would help offset whatever that gap is? And so at this point in time, what we would like to do with the board's approval is to come back to you next week with our working document that sort of indicates what is our respective need as we see it as an administrative team of the division, share it with you, give a general idea of what the costs are for each of those needs, take into account what we see as 2% transfer from the city council to the schools and what that would look like, and then identify what exactly that gap would be, and then provide for you some, perhaps in a tiered way, not unlike what was discussed last year. You know, if we go with tier 1, here's what we would reduce to be able to close that gap. In tier 2, here are some things we might take out of that list of things that we'd like, and here are some ideas to close the gap. And then maybe a third tier, here are further reductions of the things that we'd like to do, and here are some other things that we could do potentially to close any gap that still may remain. And I believe that in a number of ways, providing you sort of that tiered structure sort of takes perhaps some of the emotion out of this conversation, which can be a very emotional conversation, to the extent that we can say, here's what we need, because I have to bring to you a needs-based budget by code. Here's the amount of money we have, and here are our recommendations if we get this much money to close the gap. and kind of leave it at that, and then let the council do their work alongside with the city manager. We will continue to have conversations, and at the end of the day, finally, when we come back to budget reconciliation, identify, okay, where do we want to land on this? I am, although there's a gap, I will say that I'm rather optimistic in some respect with where I think we can go. We do anticipate some enrollment growth this coming year of 54 students. However, our enrollment growth over the last 2 years hasn't come in the way that we expected it to come in, which means that we don't have to grow in classroom teachers. In fact, there may be some ways that we can look at looking at our division again to find efficiencies and to really right-size the division in a way that could be meaningful to the employees that we have, insofar as looking at really a step and even potentially a COLA for our employees. And that's sort of the holy grail, to be honest, for employees would be able to do both. So with that as a context, I would welcome any questions you have, but I would like to say if there are deeper dive kinds of questions that you'd like to get into, if we could hold those until next week when we have the work session scheduled, that would be probably the best place to really get to those. But I did want you to know that the city manager and I, along with the CFO, Kieran Bawa, and Kristen Michael, have been working very closely together on trying to find ways that we can maneuver through this budget as a team, because we all are on one team, and what works best for the city government works best for the schools, and what works best for the schools works best for the city government. And so how do we approach this in a way that can be a win-win for everyone?
So
I was very confused.
So I sent a bunch of things.
Mr.
out the other
Castillo.
day. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I sent a bunch of questions and observations from our meeting last Monday, and I don't know, I kind of, your statement sort of had a chilling effect, like we're not supposed to talk about anything until next week, but those.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean for that to
those
happen either.
Those questions I was asking, like figuring out where the general government estimates are versus actuals on revenue and stuff like that. Are those in process, or are we trying to get some more information and maybe stretch out some of our time frames beyond 2008? Because, for example, if you look at our real expenditures per pupil, they were substantially higher, peaking, I think, around 2007 or 8. And then in real dollars, we haven't recovered to that expenditure level until in the past year or so. So are we working to, and it did seem to me that the general government presentation last Monday and ours was not entirely aligned in terms of charts and timelines and nomenclature. And are we working to harmonize all that stuff?
Yeah, to the second question that you asked in terms of harmonizing some of these, we had a very, I think, productive conversation with the city manager today to bring into focus sort of where our collective synergies can be around language, around budget, around timelines and the like. So I do feel like we're in a good place with respect to that. With respect to your first question about asking questions, I think this is the time of year that it's wholly appropriate for all of you to ask budget questions, whether it's of myself or even of the city manager. And so I think last year developed a process where if you had a budget question, you could submit it. And at that point, what we would do is we would send it to the appropriate person, ask them to respond, and then we would fan those out. And by the end of the budget process, and we tracked those question by question. And I think by the end of the process, we had in the neighborhood of about 35 budget questions that were asked. And I think it's a good exercise to ask questions around the budget. And I think the question that you asked in terms of overall growth in population and the like as it relates to the budget expenditures in the city is an interesting question, because we get asked a lot, how does our budget reflect the growth and overall percentage of growth compared to student population? So I would suggest to the board, if you all have questions that you would like me to ask, I will be the repository for those questions. I will get them fanned out. And then as I get them back, I will fan them back out to all of you, and we will track those moving forward. But I do think it would be wholly appropriate to ask questions.
Ms. Russell.
So I guess the request would be if someone were to ask questions and you were to get responses back, would it be possible to then share the question and response? So we're not.
100%. Every time I get a budget question, I will respond to everybody. Yep. And then we will also post those budget questions. Kristen, do you want to?
And we'll use the same process.
Any other questions? All right. We'll move on to second reading and adoption of policies. We'll turn it over to Ms. Minson.
Good evening. We have 9 policies for second reading and adoption tonight. All of them relate to school board, or all are in section B. The first 3 would be replacing policy 2.21, so it would cover quorum, rules of order, and voting method. For policy B, D, 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 there are no changes to the proposed policy from first reading last month. Any questions on the quorum policy?
Nope.
Hearing none. Policy B, D, D, E, rules of order. There was one question last month, which is the newly revised, Robert's Rules of Order newly revised, the most recent edition? We do have a copy of it. It is the 11th edition that was published in 2011. So it is the most recent version of Robert's Rules. I do think it makes sense to name which rules the board will be relying on in its rules of orders, to the extent that the policies, the law doesn't provide otherwise. So there were no changes to the policy from first reading, but did want to clarify that the version of Robert's Rules that's written in is the most one, that's 1111. Any questions on policy B, D, D, E, rules of order?
Seeing none.
All right. Policy B, D, D, F, voting method. No changes to this policy either, and the previous policy was virtually word for word what is included in B, D, D, F. Any questions about voting method?
Okay.
Policy BDD, electronic participation in meetings from remote locations. There were no questions or changes from first reading to this, and it was very similar to our previous policy, 0.23. Any questions?
Questions? Seeing none.
All right, policy BDDA, notification of school board meetings. There is one letter that is in red here, but actually was in first reading as well, so there were no changes from first reading to second reading of this policy, and other than adding in lines 24 to 31, which is provided by the Virginia Code, this policy was very much in line with the language from policy 2.24, which it would be replaced with this new policy BDDA. Any questions?
Seeing none, if you can continue.
Next policy BDDC, agenda preparation and dissemination. There was one change to this, and the next 3 policies changing school board chairman to school board chair. That change is noted with strike through on line 5. Otherwise, there were no changes from first reading for BDDC. Question?
No questions.
All right, BDDG minutes. Similarly at line 6, chairman was changed to chair. There also was a question whether lines 14 to 15 were required. I did look and see that is required for Virginia Code 2.2, 3711, section I, that minutes may be taken during closed meetings, but should not be required, and minutes will not be subject to mandatory disclosure. So I do think that since that's outlined in the Virginia Code, it makes sense to include that language, but did want to respond to one of the questions from first reading. There's no proposed changes other than that at line 6 for BDDG.
Any questions? Seeing none.
BDB, special school board meetings, there would be a change at line 6 from chairman to chair, and also the proposed change at line 11 from is not transaction to shall not be transacted, to make it clear that the shall is mandatory language. Otherwise, this is very much in line with our previous policy and no other changes from first reading.
Any questions? Being none.
And last one for the night is policy BG and GBD. So it would appear both in the school board policies and the personnel policies. There were some questions from first reading about including the language and sole employee at line 7. As Dr. Noonan and I promised, we did noodle through that and thought it made sense to take that out. That was a good point from you all. The other change we made, a question came up about referencing specifically Peak, Seek, and EEK as avenues that staff members could use to present information to the board. And it was raised that since not all employees are members of Peak, Seek, EEK, does this in some way limit or make it appear that we're not interested or the board is not interested in hearing from all staff? And so taking that into account, we suggested removing that from lines 15 through 18. So instead, the policies it reads is essentially we encourage two-way communication. You can come to school board meetings, you can talk to administrators, and we want to hear the concerns of staff. Any questions about BG, GBD?
Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Ms. Manson. All right. Being that there were no questions for these policies, I will entertain a motion, please, to adopt.
I move that the school board approve the second reading and adoption of policies BDDD, quorum, BDDE, rules of order, BDDF, voting method, BDD, electronic participation in meetings from location, BDDA, notification of school board meetings, BDDC, agenda preparation and dissemination, BDDG, minutes, BDB, special school board meetings, and BG/GBD, board staff communications as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Litton. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. All right. We'll move on. Are there any future agenda items that anyone would like to bring up for discussion? All right. Seeing none, turn it over to Dr. Noonan for the superintendent's report.
Thank you so much. Just a couple of things. First, I wanted to congratulate Mary Jo West and the music program for a really great winter concert over at George Mason High School last week. For those of you that were there, I somehow got roped to go up on stage and sit on the couch, and I got a gift from Santa, and it was really a lot of fun, actually, and had a good time. But the students were really the stars of the show and did a really fantastic job, and very proud of each and every one of those, and also Mary Jo West for her incredible work. If you haven't been up to Mount Daniel in a while, go up, but don't park if you don't mind. But do go up because all of the trailers are gone. I know it was mentioned earlier tonight, but I do think it was a huge milestone for us to get all of those off the site. And currently the backhoes are up there tearing up the asphalt in preparation for final grade. The plan at this point is to do a base coat and then to do a final asphalt coat by the end of winter break. As I've mentioned, I think some of you in the past, it depends on whether or not they're making asphalt as to whether we'll really get the final asphalt coat, because this time of year, many asphalt companies shut down, do their annual cleaning, and then come back when it's a little warmer. Regardless of whether or not we get the final asphalt coat, we will stripe the base coat if we need to, so there will be parking up there. And in the meantime, I wanted to also thank Tim Kasich, the principal at Mount Daniel. He was able to successfully do something that some of us were not able to successfully do, and that is negotiate a contract with High Point Pool for a little bit of parking for the next couple of weeks while the final digging up of the parking lot is done. With membership comes privileges, apparently. But anyway, he did a really fine job working with the board over at High Point Pool and has gotten permission from them to park on that site temporarily. And so we're excited about that. So do go up. This Sunday, we have a Sunday series coming up. And this Sunday will be focused primarily on the West Falls Church development site. So EYA PN Hoffman will be doing a presentation along with Wyatt Shields. My presentation will be on the order of around 5 minutes, and it's just going to be to update the community that we are in the middle of design development. Our staff members are being met with at the high school. We're talking about the spaces, what happens where, looking at how do we outfit the science labs, what are the final drawings going to look like, and the like. And then I'll have a seat and let the city manager take his turn. And then I want to thank all of you for coming to so many events. I know this is a time of year it's really hectic and heavy. And it starts with VSBA and goes forward, and all of you have been showing up to things and really appreciate that and appreciate your commitment. Last week, Ms. Litton and our chair, Mr. Webb, were able to attend the legislative breakfast over in Arlington. And at the legislative breakfast, we had a chance to meet with Lilla Wise, but more importantly, I think, was an opportunity to network with both Arlington Public Schools and Alexandria Public Schools with their two superintendents and their school board members to talk about their respective legislative packages. And I think it was an influential and great help to us putting together the packet. So again, Ms. Litton, thank you so much for that. This week, had an opportunity, this week and last week actually, to visit with a couple of former superintendents here in the City of Falls Church. Some of you might have seen some pictures, but last week I had lunch with Stuart Roberson and also Mary Ellen Shaw. Both former superintendents, and Mary Ellen Shaw actually was at Mount Daniel Elementary from 1977 until 1990. She started out as a first grade teacher there and ended up as superintendent of schools. Subsequent to our lunch last week, she wanted a tour. And so she came back yesterday and we had a chance to walk around Mount Daniel School with Mary Ellen, visited her original classroom, which is still there in the original building. It doesn't look exactly the same, but she got a chance to see the old school. And at the end, it was really very sweet. I was walking out and we'd gone through the whole school, and I said, is there anything else I can show you before we go? And she said, would you take me to the old front of the school? And so we went down the sidewalk, down the bus loop, and up the remaining staircase, and then took a right and went to the front of the school. And there sat the Mary Ellen Shaw planter, and it was there with her name on it still, and she was very pleased to see that was still there. And then today I had a chance to tour Stuart Roberson, former superintendent as well, through Mount Daniel, and he saw some friends that he hadn't seen for a while, as did Mary Ellen, by the way. She and Nan Hoff gave each other a big hug. They hadn't seen each other in many years, but Stuart also saw some old friends and took his picture with Danny, the big hippo there in the front, and that was a lot of fun. So anyway, it was nice to reconnect to some of the history in the City of Falls Church and reconnect to some of the former royalty and, well, forever royalty, I think, here in the City of Falls Church. And then I also had on my list to talk to you about the Fellows property, but we covered that already. So that, Mr. Chair, is my update. And happy holidays to all of you. I do hope that you have a chance to rest and recharge your batteries over the break. And come back strong and ready to hit the ground running, because we've got some big work ahead of us over the next couple of years. And that's going to take every ounce of energy we've got to sort of move through it. So get your rest, and to our community and to our students and to our friends out in the land, happy holidays to all of you from our family to yours.
Thank you, Dr. Noonan. Are there any questions for the superintendent on anything he spoke on? All right. If not, we will move on to board and student liaison comment, and I will start with Ms. Wyckoff tonight.
It's been a while since I'm still here by the time we get to this part of the agenda. Usually these meetings are a lot longer.
Look,
but,
we appreciate it. We appreciate it.
I just want to start by thanking Dr. Noonan as an active member of the band for giving Miss West a shout out. I spend most of my time in that band room, and we work very hard, and I think that showed in our concert. Other than that, in terms of the school, I think December just always reminds me how much our school is focused on giving back to the community. As I was just looking at my Schoology page, and like every single post is Food for Others or the SCA or someone posting a canned food drive or a Toys for Tots drive, and I think that's really great and something that's really different about this school than any of the other school I was at. So I think that's really great, and I think everyone's just really excited for winter break.
Very good. Go down to Ms. Gill.
Met with the athletic boosters last night. They still have questions about the gym and the glass wall. I said to continue talking to you as much as they can. No, but and then I went to the Chamber of Commerce meeting this morning, and they are all. Oh, and athletic boosters are very excited about the parking arrangement. They were very, very pleased to hear with EYA that there's going to be a parking shared overflow parking for events.
Right, we yet to know what that's going to look like,
Right,
but there
but
will be
they were
overflow
very happy
parking,
that their
yes.
discussion was happening.
That's
They,
good.
because we hadn't been able to share that in the past. I think they were really happy to see that even EY, everyone was talking about it as shared parking. And the Chamber of Commerce had a really successful Live Local FC, so continue to live local and spend your holiday dollars.
Thank you. Ms. Litton? Okay. Mr. Castillo?
Yeah, I missed the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee last week, so I was out of town on personal matters, so nothing to report for now.
Can I comment on Parks and Rec? Only because it spurred my memory of a conversation I had last night at the Ed Foundation with Brian Williams, who was there, mentioned when will Mount Daniel be available to become part of the Parks and Rec's use again. And what we've said to them is that once the parking's done, it'll be back into the flow for use. And so we anticipate that Mount Daniel's gym will be available in January for use for youth basketball and other things as well. I know that was on Danny Schlitt's mind as well, and we communicated that to him today.
So I was actually at a report foundation meeting. Besides the
Yeah. Can I send you
Actually,
the?
Don,
Can I send you the agenda? Oh, can I see it?
I'll pull that out.
Yeah, we did have a nice. Go ahead.
Well, I was just, that reminded me that I did have coffee with Debbie Hiscott from the Ed Foundation. She had reached out to all of us, inviting us to talk about what the Ed Foundation's future work should be with respect to, especially the new high school. And we had a really good conversation, and I think we had some good ideas about how the Ed Foundation can maybe help turn our division into a lab that becomes the premier school division through IB. And I think one of the things that was most helpful from our conversation was there's often that thought that if you need money, the Ed Foundation can supply some. And Debbie gave a really good summary of their core mission, which is helping at-risk families, assisting with teacher professional development, and supporting innovation. And I thought that was in fact, I went home to my daughter who had said, well, maybe we can get some money from the Ed Foundation for Cappies. And I said, that's their mission. And she said, oh, okay, that makes sense. And it's like problem solved. So anyway, I hope you'll all reach out to the Ed Foundation leadership and have a similar meeting, because I thought it was really helpful.
And I was invited to their annual retreat again this year in February at Viget, and we'll be part of that. So last night's meeting started with an audit report. It's all sort of coming back. It flows together. But last night began with an audit report, and the audit was an unqualified, perfect audit, and that was very exciting. And then we rolled into my update, and I shared with them very similar information that I've shared with you, and the Friday updates, and also in the community message that I sent this week with respect to Matt Daniel, George Mason, collaborative practices, and the like. Following that, what was next? You have the agenda there?
I think pretty much just what's keeping Debbie up at night.
Yeah, and then they went on with their meeting, and at that point, I did leave. It was a small group last night because it was a middle school choral concert, and many of the foundation members have some students that were in the choral concert, so I think there were about 6 people at the foundation meeting. You were missed. And by me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to echo Dr. Noonan on the shout out to Joe West and the band. It was a great concert. And highlight that next week there is, for those who have an interest, the JV show at George Mason on Wednesday and Thursday nights. And then the next advisory committee meeting for me is the Gift and Talent Advisory Committee meeting on Thursday. We'll be talking about professional development and their input on budget issues and sort of thing. And then the only other thing I would say is to highlight, I've had some feedback from some of my fellow members on the board norms and operational procedures discussion. And I'm going to wait another day or so to get any final feedback, and then I'll put something together to share with you all. If that works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Nothing to report from an advisory committee perspective. There is a support employees advisory committee meeting tomorrow, but unfortunately I'll be traveling, so I will miss. I would like to also talk briefly about the winter concert. I was also privileged to be there, and it's always fascinating to me to see how our students perform. Both in things like performances like Chicago and then the winter concert. The arts program across the board is very impressive. I was disappointed in one thing though, which is when Dr. Noonan went up and sat on the couch with Santa. Given that there had been some very nice jazz vocals before, I was hoping to hear the smooth stylings of Dr. Peter Noonan, but sadly, we were privileged to hear Miles Jackson read to us, but we did not hear any choral interruptions from Dr. Noonan, and that was very sad.
The choral concert is so it's still time.
Noted, thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to echo what Dr. Noonan was attending the legislative breakfast. It was a good opportunity to interact with and hear some of the different things that are going on with some of our colleagues and try to find mutual interest areas as we get ready for the session down in Richmond this upcoming January. Also, it was Alexandria, I think, which we're in a good spot. They had 4 brand new board members who were in attendance because, from what I understand, I think Alexandria's school board, I think almost everyone is up for election at the same time. So there's always that potential of a brand new slate of people all the time versus kind of staggering a little bit. But it was good to meet some of those new folks that were there. And then also find out a couple folks over there that are Falls Church City alumni. Their clerk said to tell Marty hello. I didn't realize she had been in the city for a while, and I didn't know until she mentioned that Lola also worked in the city for a while too, so I did not know that. So Falls Church roots go kind of deep around the area, but it was good to have the opportunity to meet with folks over there. Always good to try to find friends and allies in different localities that are a little bit bigger than us and have a little bit bigger reach. So it's always to help us as we go down to Richmond for many different things over the time. So with that, we have a couple of minutes that need to be approved. Let's see. As unanimous consent for the minutes of July 18, 2017. Approval of minutes for November 13th, 2018, and approval of minutes for November 20th, 2018. It's unanimous consent if those would be approved. Without objection, so ordered. Thank you, Marty. Material for review of enrollment, and we will move on to our second closed meeting for this evening. And I believe there'll be no other business after that, so just let the folks know. If I could entertain a motion for that, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter personnel under section 2.2-3711A1, in particular, personnel discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Castillo. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Reitinger. Ms. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Reitinger?
Yes.
Ms. Russell? Mr. Webb?
Yes. Thank you very much.
We go to my office.
We can do that. Thank you very much.